we're dealing with today is I have a set of tongs that it's totally failed out. It's just there's just too much slack in all these joints across here. I've already pressed the nuts enough times to get all the life I can out of them, and we're gonna do basically an upgrade or a retrofit with some nuts and bolts. And we're gonna get these tongs to give us a little bit more lifetime out of them. It's very imperative that you pay attention to all the fine details of the steps of doing this. If you just try and slap this all together real fast to save time, you're just going to mess it all up. Your tongs aren't going to perform right. You're going to drop pins, or you're going to knock pins over, and then you're going to be blaming me saying that it didn't work right. You are going to save a lot of money in doing this upgrade this way because you won't have to buy the tongs or any of the parts. It takes a little bit of labor, but you got to take your time and pay attention to the fine details. First thing that we have to do, we're going to go ahead and disassemble this set of tongs so we can get down to the gear works and work on that with all the unions. So we'll go ahead and extract that bracket. We're going to flip it upside down. You can sit anything under this. What I'm doing is I'm placing it actually underneath the hinge side here. I want that arm to be able to clear the clasp. I'm just popping them off like that. You can use anything. You could use a hammer. This rolls a little bit. If you had something like a dead blow hammer, you could set it out. Might keep everything from shuffling around on you so much. There you go. We're just getting the gear works out. We'll set these arms to the side. And we're just going to focus on one set right now. Now I've got a vise here. I've got the gear works. I'm just going to go ahead and set it up in the vise. Got this at a weird angle just so you can see it better. I'll bring you around here to show you exactly how I'm clamped in. Now there's I'm going to leave the rest of these, there's 4 total unions to separate, 4 speed nuts to extract. I'm going to work as close as I can to this clamp because I don't want to, if I work out here, you end up bending these. You could break these, and that's what I don't want to do. So I've got a chisel that I'm going to work with. I'm going to stick the chisel behind the speed nut and then tap it out at the top. I'll pull you out a little so you can see what's going on here. So right now I'm between the speed nut and the actual plastic of the link. And I'm going to hit it. And that actually just crimped that ring. See how it's bent a little to the side? It's hard to pick it up. Now with that ring with that little bend in it, I can just get behind it with the chisel and pop it out again. And usually it just frees it right up. And you'll make sure not to damage this part too much what's left over here. Same thing. Just put your chisel behind it. Clamp that down a little more. Now I got a good bend in it. Now I come from one of the angled sides. And I'm only working on these press nuts closest to where I've clamped. I'm not going to mess with this one out here until I get it clamped into the vise. I'm going to take both of these legs right here, stick them right in the vise. There's all my parts. Now you can see everything's all separated out. I'm going to back out and do one real quick just so you can see the full time it takes without having to stop or explain anything. I've got the full gearworks here. Get this running work better, more efficiently. This is a different direction set of tongs. So for me to clamp it, I'm going to put it in the opposite side of the vise because I want to keep the speed nut all on the side where I'm constantly working at. So instead of clamping it here, I'm going to clamp it on this side. That's how long it should take you to just separate that one set. Now, just separating them is not as critical as the next steps that we're going to do. So any way you can separate them, get them apart without totally tearing up the whole system, just get the speed nuts off. If there's a better way that you can find to do it, go ahead and do it that way. So now it's time, there's going to be a little explaining on this next step of what's getting ready to happen. Of all these parts, they've all got the linkage point where the speed nut was pressed onto them. There's 4 of them. You got one on the wheel. You got one on each of these arms on the tops here, and then you got one on your other piece of plastic here. I have to figure out the names for everybody. But anyways, so I've got it marked. It's very hard to see, but I got it marked with some yellow. I took a yellow wax pencil and I marked around the lip. It's really hard to see, so I got a crude drawing that I'm going to put out here and show everybody. This is basically it, what's happening here, and there's a little step down on all of those pieces where the speed nut presses on. What we're getting ready to do is we're going to cut off this upper part. We're going to extract that. But what you have to do whenever you cut it, you want to cut it as square as you can, just below. I'm going to put a dotted line here. Hope we can. You want to cut off barely just below that surface of where it's tapered. Okay, everything above there. If you so if you did it just like this, then that's good. All right. But if you went through and you cut it at an angle like that, that's not good. That's bad. All right. So you want to make sure that you cut it square, and we want to go just below the surface. Draw this up real quick. You're going to cut just below the surface of that, right off the top of there. All right. So that's going to be the way you want to cut it, nice and square. You don't want to go too deep because you need as much of this base as you can possibly have to keep the system sturdy. The tool I'm going to use to do this, it seems to work out pretty well, is an air die grinder with a carbide tip blade. Small enough you can handle it and everything. If you get 2 guys doing this as a mechanic, you can develop a system. One guy can be popping them apart in a vise, and you don't really have to have a second vise to do this part, but it's good that you find a way to steady your hand while you're doing it. Now it's going to get loud here, but I'm just going to show you. I used to put it in the vise. I found one day that I can just hold it in my hand and do just fine with it, pretty steady. But I'm going to brace myself on the actual this tabletop, this work surface. And I'm just going to square this point off. And the reason I'm bracing my hands is because I don't want to come through the other side and nick into myself. not much that you're cutting off. It's just a it's not much that you're cutting off. On some of them, you can see it's barely what's left over after you cut it is barely about 1/8 of an inch thick, you know. But and these vary in sizes. This arm, this one's about 3/8 of an inch tall that you have left to work with when you're cut. When you cut these off, you're just gonna have about maybe 3/16 left there on it. And the wheel, when you cut it off, you got about 1/4 inch that you're gonna have still stubbed out. Sorry, you're gonna have 1/4 inch. Make sure you've seen that. You're gonna have about 3/8 left over on this arm, left out. On these arms, you should have about 3/16 sticking up after you cut off the excess. And with this one, you'll have about a 1/4 inch left over right there on that spot once you top that off. And I just shut off the air compressor just so it wouldn't be running loud, but it'll you can run it on lower RPMs to cut it. You don't have to run this wide open to work through it, especially with the carbide tip on the wheel. So I cut all those off. They're all set up. Now the next step you can do to check that everything will fit right is if you know what stacks up on the links, you can set your link over top of it and just feel that it's just below the surface. You want the peg just below the surface of that armature that you're connecting there. So that one was fine. And I'll show you too here. There's burrs of plastic on the outside of this where I ground it off. I'll pull them off and show them to you. Those burrs that are left over, you have to completely extract those from the edge of what you just ground off. If you don't completely extract it and smooth off the surface, then whenever you put it together and try and link it up, you're going to have free-flowing motion, and then it'll start to bind halfway through the action. So this is a critical point. This is a critical part of this repair. You really have to get off all those burrs. I wouldn't recommend sanding them. I do something I usually use a Phillips screwdriver, and the head of it I can rub around on the edge of this tip. You see, since all these are cut, I'll check this last wheel. It goes with this arm. It's below the surface, so it's going to be fine. Now I got to check the actual arm link. I'm going to take both of these, double stack them up, how they go. It's just perfect. It's right below the edge of it, so everything there is great. Now with everything all cut with the carbide cutoff air die grinder, you got to do one more step. These arms here have to be drilled out so the bolt can run through that we're gonna fit it up with. There's already a hole started. It just doesn't come all the way through the back. And you could do this step before of drilling these out. Put it in any order you want to. I find this works better just because after you go ahead and grind this off, now you're left with some burrs inside this hole. And if you drill it first and then cut it, the burrs still fill up the hole. So we're gonna take care of two problems at one time. We're gonna go ahead and drill straight through so I can actually put the link through, and we're gonna clean out the burrs that are left in there from sanding it. So this bit is 11/64, and it's just gonna follow right through the hole that's already in this arm. Alright, so that's all set up, and as I was telling you earlier, when you have burrs, take a Phillips screwdriver, and I'm just going to run the pointed head right in the hole and just twist it a little to make sure everything's cleaned out of there. and then you got to check your sidewalls. If you got stuff along the outside of this, then you can put it in one of the valleys on a Phillips screwdriver and just rub that head of the screwdriver right around it, and it'll clean it off. Sometimes it'll just come off with a rag, but it's real important that you get all these burrs off. You don't want any of them there. It'll mess you up big time. If it is a little higher than your plates, you can always take your air die grinder, and you could just go through and touch this up and grind it down a little bit. So I'm going to keep cleaning all these parts just to make sure all the burrs are off of them for this first set. You don't have to drill any of the other holes, because as you can see, they already have holes through them. You just had to add the one to that arm. So, and last but not least, this one seems to not be there. I cleaned it out. Okay, so I got all my parts set up. Now we're going to get the hardware to fasten them together with. The first part we're going to go ahead and rebuild is the main gear wheel, and this is the hardware you're going to need to correct or to repair this. First of all, you're going to need some, I'm using number 6 by 32 machine screws. You want to use pan heads. You don't want to use a bugle head or anything like that. They're pan heads, and they're 3/4 of an inch long. Next part that you're going to need is, I've got a number 6 washer, small washers, a number 10 washers to go with it, and finally 6 by 632 nylon lock nuts is what we have. So you just need one screw, get your small number 6 washer and place it on there first, onto the screw. And the 3/4 length on the screw is very important. I wouldn't get any longer or really any shorter than that. It's the perfect length to use. Then get your number 10 washer and load it on there. So you're basically you're stacked up like that. You have it stacked up to work together. The number 6 washer is just because the screw is so small, I don't want it to wobble through the hole. And the number 10 washer has to be big enough to cover the span of what you're trying to hold together. So now we're going to go ahead and take the arm link that connects to the gear wheel, go ahead and set it through there, and run your screw just through the top, just like so. On the base, and the reason I chose number 6s for this is because the nut, the nylon lock nut that goes on number 6 screw, is small enough to fit up inside the opening that's on this gear wheel. Any larger screw and the nylon lock nut would not fit up inside there, and that's what I want. Now that I've got it together, I'm just going to go ahead and tighten this screw down enough to where it is Okay, it has to be tight enough that this arm doesn't wobble, but it has to be free moving. You want no friction. You want a nice fluid motion. So you just got to work with it, and you got to back it out till you get it to the right amount of tension. It may just be a 1/16 or an 1/8 of a turn sometimes just to get it right. That feels pretty good. It's free moving. There's no wobble in it. And if I hold it up, I mean, with very little effort, it just falls back down. And this is really imperative that you made sure you had no burrs in there. If you tighten this up and you get to a point to where it moves freely on one side, but it binds on the other part, that's probably because you have a burr of the plastic that you ground off left under there, and it's messing you up. Now, if you can't get the screw tight, the screw ought to be able to go tight enough to where it can totally stop the movement, and then that'll tell you, yeah, you ground it low enough. But if you tighten this screw up and it bottoms out and you still have wobble and play, then you didn't cut your head off enough off of that shaft. Alright, so this is the next part that we're going to work on getting together and getting right. It takes a little bit less parts for it because we're not trying to cover the whole of that 10 millimeter washer, or number 10 washer. So what you're going to need is, these are 8x32s. We go with a little bit bigger screw because it perfectly fits the hole that's been pre-drilled at the factory. So we're going to use number 832, and it is 3/4 of an inch long. Then you're going to need the number 10 washer again, and you're going to need an 8x32 nylon lock nut is what I'm using. The screw out of there. Okay, now there's two arms, and they're gonna link like that basically. But what you got to pay attention is all the nuts and bolts, or I'm sorry, all the nuts, the nylon lock nuts that you put on, you want to be facing up in the air when the assembly is put into the table. The only one that it wouldn't matter would be the main gear wheel. That's going to face down because it actually hides up inside the housing. But all the other ones, you don't want any nuts to be on the base. You want everything to be on the top. So you got to think about how you position them, because you can't just stack all of them up like this and just nut and bolt all of them, because whenever you put them together, you're going to have some on the wrong side, and that's not what we want. So thinking about the positioning of where it's going to be, since my link arm is on top, I'm going to need to have my washer up on top here. So on this one, I just run the screw straight through the base, no washer at all. Just run the screw head up. Alright, then take your link arm and clean it a little. Take your link arm and go ahead and put it on the assembly. Then throw your number 10 washer over top of it, and then place your nylon lock nut on top of that. And I'm going to set this to the side. I'm not going to tighten it up just yet. And I'm going to go ahead and do the other one. Okay, now this one, the arm, the link goes on the base. So I'm still going to run the screw through the base, but since I got to hold that link on from underneath, I have to run the screw through the base. But this one, the screw has to have the washer on it, so it can hold the link on. Because here's where it's got to hold it together. So the washer has to be on the bottom of this one, and the nut would go on the top of this side with no washer on it. And then when they go together, that's how they're going to work. Both the nylon lock nuts on the top. But you got a washer on one side. The washer is going to be on the side that your link arm goes on. Alright, to work on these, I found a best way so you don't have to handle too many tools. These nuts that I'm working with, the nylon lock nuts, they're able to, I'm able to use a 9 millimeter socket head on it. So I go ahead and I clamp the socket head into the vise. And then that way I can come on this side I can stick the nut up inside the socket, and I can tighten the screw up without actually having to hold another tool, because you're going to have to do a lot of quick adjustments. Just a little too much play. I'm going to tighten it up just a little bit. That's, So I got the wobble out of it. Feels like it's moving pretty fluidly. So that one should be all set up and ready to go. I'll do the next one that I made up. Still too tight. Just a little too loose. No wobble. Nice fluid motion. So that arm is all set up to go. Now we've got everything prepped to put together. We're going to go ahead and link everything as one. I've got the final parts for it. I've got, these are 832 by 1 inch. And the reason I go for the longer length is because this is one of the longest connections that you're going to have to do. So you need that, the 3/4 is not long enough to lock it down with a nylon lock nut and to keep it on there safely. So, and you need number 10 washers again, and 8x32 nylon lock nuts again. Okay, now after all the work you did, you want to make sure that you still have the nylon lock nuts facing up when you're doing this. Go ahead and set both your arm links together and then press the links over top of each other so they rest properly. So now you got both the nuts right in the same spot. You got them facing up. Just cross them over. Make sure that your links are in the right spot. And go ahead and run that longer arm straight through. And your links are on this side, so your washer goes on this side. And you just run the number 8-inch long screw through the back where we pre-drilled the hole. Place your washer over the top. Put your nylon lock nut on top of that as well. Then we're going to go over to the vise again, and we're going to tighten it up. Or you just want it just tight enough that there's no play or no wobble in the links, but you want a smooth, fluid motion, no binding. I think that's fairly well. Alright, so now we're going to take it, and I'm going to show you one more thing. I've just dried off and cleaned off the shaft. I'm going to lube it later. We're just going to put this back together, and I'm going to show you the importance of a key spot of this. So as it rotates, you got to have the pan head on the top here, so whenever the gear works, it's going to come around. It does rotate, and you can see that one pan head comes in contact with this main gear wheel on the head, on the face of it. See how it disappears behind it? It's that screw right there. It disappears behind. And since it's a pan head and it's rounded edges, it goes up behind the gearworks with no issues whatsoever. So it's not going to bind anything. If you had a bugle head, that might be sharper, might stick out more, and it might affect it. So that's why it's important. And that's why that's also another reason why you can't have the nuts on the base side. If there was a nylon lock nut here and this went to rotate, it would just lock that wheel up and none of it would work. So pay attention that your nuts are all on the top, except for the one that is installed up inside the gear wheel in the back. Now we'll go ahead and put the arms back on. Got a little bit of blue grease to put on this central shaft. It's a Polyrex EM. Mobile Polyrex EM grease is what I'm using for these shafts. bring everything together. Alright, and that is a complete set of tongs, retrofitted, took care of all the speed nut issues. And this will, you'll notice if you did everything as I said, this set of tongs will pick up the pins, no problems, no issues. Make sure your dampers are clean on the inside, because you've been touching everything a lot. If it drops your first rack of pins, don't start freaking out. Just make sure that the dampers are clean, and you got to set your timing right. You can, even though I've been doing this for years, I still every once in a while set a row of timing wrong on a set of tongs, and it'll drop some pins. You just got to take it, you got to back up and punt and reset it. It gets you through all your issues of pin drops. It will last for a long time. We've already been doing this. We've had this system up and going in a facility, I believe, for almost 2 years now. And our other facility is just starting to fail, so we're just going through right now. We're retrofitting everything in here to get it to work again and get a little bit more work out of your tongs. So good luck with your repairs. Hope everything works out for you. And take your time. Do one lane at a time and make sure you're confident in what you're doing. But it will work if you do it properly.